All right, so Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Zan. Happy New Year to the viewer as well. Let's dive back in. How's it been? How was it?
Well, Jordan, it's been a year since we launched this podcast. A year ago, almost pretty close to this day, maybe, right?
Mm.
Towards the third week of January, because I
Oh
was
yeah,
in
yes.
I was in Florence. I went there on a pilgrimage to hide and to weep by myself for 30 days, and I sat in this quiet
Mm.
hotel in the heart of Florence. And we did this first podcast kind of accidentally. You and I got on a
Well,
call.
well, that's well, that's the thing. When you said we started this podcast a year ago, I'm like, what? In my mind, we started around April or something like that. But that's because we had that episode.
Yeah.
That was not that was actually destined to be something else. So that seems like eons ago that you
Wow.
were there, and I was in Thailand in this little wooden house that
Yeah.
we used to rent up in the woods.
Yeah. And then just right after that, everything just kind of crashed on the economy and the pandemic, and everyone got locked down. And you moved since then to Bali. I came
Yeah.
back to Romania, but I haven't drifted too far from here at
Hmm.
all
Hmm.
for
So
the
are you,
last
are you
year.
reflective then, kicking off this year?
Yeah, because it's interesting, um, it's interesting how I'm not sure what to make of it, to be honest. I'm not sure what to make of this year. It's like when I went to Nicaragua to work on my book, The Alabaster Girl. I went there for 4 months to finish it. I was 90% done. I just had to do some tidying up and rearranging and done. And I spent 4 months there with no distractions, nothing to do,
Yeah.
no electricity, nothing, no internet, and I still didn't get it done. So you reflect on it years later, and I've talked about this before. People probably heard me say this before, but I realize that now in in hindsight, that my 4 month sojourn to Nicaragua was not to finish my book that I intended, but it gave it a different flavor, a different a worldview type of flavor. I can't really describe it, but it gave it a different tone than it would have had if I hadn't gone there. So I'm looking at this year, Newton's annus mirabilis, which is his year of miracles. It wasn't quite a year of miracles for me, but maybe it was. So you look at it later.
So you didn't discover any new inventions over the last 12
I
months
didn't
that you can
invent the
come
next
out and tell
version
us?
of calculus or trigonometry, no, and I didn't
Yeah.
figure out the music of the spheres, no. No, well, maybe
Well,
I did. Maybe I just
it's
haven't.
in gestation, in gestation. Yeah. I read somewhere actually a nice idea, a comforting idea that actually the artists of the world are not going to be that productive during the pandemic because it's a time to actually process everything that's going on. So in order to make
Yeah,
sense out of the world and make sense of all the things that we've felt and maybe the values that we've been appraising and the way that we see our countries, nations, people going about things, then that takes on its own gestating period. And I think a lot of the fruit of what happened last year will start to emerge this
yeah,
year and beyond.
yeah. I completely believe it. I mean, I said it in our earlier episodes that I do believe we're at the end of some age and on embarking on some kind of. We won't know it for till post um, down the road when you can't really name an era when you're in it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can certainly see it when it's gone by a decade or two, and it's the same turmoil that was between 1900 and 1920 that gave us Stravinsky and Braque and Ulysses by Joyce and The Wasteland by Eliot. It all arose from that confluence of world beating, world dominating events like the advent of photography, the Great War, uh, the post-industrial revolution, all these things, the Spanish flu, and out of that came, and Einstein's two theories of relativity, general and special. All of that arose in this crucial time of turmoil and exploded into this new awareness or a new age, I guess, you know. And I think we're in the same thing. There's 2000 to 2020, 2000, 2020, maybe something's going to burst out of here. I have this kind of like this secret conceit, the secret little thought that maybe there's going to be a solitary person arise on this earth like Einstein did in his own thoughts, hiding in his patent office in Switzerland. In his own thoughts, he didn't collaborate with any other mathematician, science, you know, physicist, whatever. And he invented an entire new paradigm for the entire world to see. I think there's going to be some kind of scientist entity type guy that's going to come and say, hey, look at what I discovered. And everybody's going to go, huh? And the world's going to go, what? And it's going to shift the consciousness again of the planet. That's my little secret. And you know what? It's going to be one guy as opposed to a committee. All science and all physics and everything nowadays is committee based and collaboration based, and they even look down on anybody like a Tesla or whatever who is a you know, kind of their own iconoclast. But you know, Steinbeck said that no great enterprise or no great thing has ever been created by committee ever. It's always been one entity that came up with it, and then a second entity that came along as his adjunct, as his or hers second, who championed it, like you know, Freud and Jung. And anyway,
very interesting, very controversial, because I think a lot of people who would say that they're on the leading edge at the moment would claim that the next big thing is going to arise out of a collective. The next big movement in spirituality or awakening, the next big movements in any kind of complexity theory, all these circles and network people that say no one person can see the whole of the elephant.
That's right.
Therefore, since we're all in blind with one hand, we have to put our clues together.
But you think of all of the singular entities, Einstein, Newton, Copernicus, they were you know, they were Galileo, they were outcasts from the scientific community and the theological and religious community. They were in trouble and not accepted and poo-pooed away and tissed into the corners, you know? And so that's my thinking too now. And and it goes against the because it's such a collaborative internet-based online, you know, you'll see a scientific breakthrough that they discovered that metformin does XYZ, and it was by some guy in China at the University of, you know, Beijing and University of Zurich and University and Harvard. You know, the three scientists from three different things all collaborated on one research project. So who knows? I still think there's that guy.
Right. So as you're thinking about this, I take it you're also working solo like a mad professor over in your office, trying to crank out the words of your next book, right? I was wondering what under the banner of creating culture and restoring beauty, which is at the heart of what we're doing, what does a day in your creative life look like as you go about the business of restoring beauty? And well, how is your day set up or structured in a way that helps you to bleed some of your ideas forth? Okay.
Well, you might be surprised because I'm not prolific. You know, I'm not Proust, who wrote every minutia of his life for 25 years and created this big giant, you know, volume of his life. My day starts with me in a cup of coffee, and I sit in my rocking chair, which is right over there, and I sit and I rock and I contemplate. So I spend a lot of time thinking and scratching my head and wondering and looking out the window. My book, I use a program called Scrivener. If anybody's a writer out there, they probably know what Scrivener is, and fantastic program. And I sit and I pick away and I adjust something and I think of something I'm trying to write about. As always, my biggest stumbling block with writing is the structure. In other words, and not the paragraph structure, because I can write, if you give me a topic, say, what we just talked about, you know, like what is coronavirus year done or been, I could write a blog length essay and it would be coherent and would be, but so it's not that, it's not the content or the themes I'm lacking. It is what is the overall tone? And that's what I think about every day. I'm not kidding. I don't think about concepts or words. I sit in my rock chair and I think about, how does this want to feel? And that's so important to me. Like with the Alabaster Girl, it had to have this musicality. And this book has to have this feel of, what I'm going for is a contemplative feel, if that makes sense. I want somebody to read it. And, you know, the Alabaster Girl had paragraphs, and I set the paragraphs apart by white space. So there's no paragraphs that are right after each other. There's a paragraph, white space, paragraph, and each paragraph related to the one before, but it was a standalone kind of thing, and I don't know how else to write. So this has the same thing. It's just thoughts that are chunk, and then another thought that's related and chunk. And it's who's speaking to whom that I've always had struggle with. You know, like, who's writing? It's not me. I'm never, the guy on the train and the Alabaster Girl is not me, but it has reflections of me and has reflections of others I've known. You know, it's kind of a third party abstracted away from me so I can say anything. And same with this, it's going to be my ideas, but it has also very influenced, or the entity who's writing this that I've constructed so far. I'm not going to give too much away because I'm very private about this. Is an amalgamation of three people. I'm writing this concept of three people, and maybe the third one would be me, or the fourth one would be me. No, third one. So anyway, so to answer your question, I think a lot. I might listen to a bit of an audiobook, which I just got turned on to in the last 4 months, because I spent the summer. Jan Bislin, one of our Amorata members, came here from the musical group Memento, came here, and he's a music producer, and he had his equipment with me. So we sat in my studio with my head in a broom closet, and I recorded my audiobook of the Alabaster Girl, which is still being post-production processed. And so since then I'm thinking, wow, audiobooks, I've never heard one in my life before. But now I wanted to see, because I was trying to compare what my audiobook would sound like to others. So I got a bunch of audiobooks, and you recommended some to me. Incredible.
So you're into it now, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, where actors' performance and delivery is up there in importance with the words as well.
Yeah. So the process of the writing, oh man, I tell you. And you know, because of the lockdown, we don't have a lot of gatherings, obviously. I don't do a lot of one-on-one live coaching, even though I've got a bunch of guys lined up for when this clears up. They're all excited to come to Bucharest and do some coaching with me. But I have been doing, you know, my quote unquote, my Winston Wolfe coaching, which is online. But other than that, man, my days are empty. I have nothing. And so I really, I could write for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. But I'm not that guy. I'm not a blogger type of entity. Like, there's a reason that there's not a bunch of articles or blogs floating around by me, because I just don't have that gumption, you know, to do that. It's not my spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm particularly curious about your writing process, or the way that you structure your days, because since I've come back from New Year as well, I made a little trip. I'll say something about that in a minute. Okay. I've been much more focused, actually, in terms of writing and my own output, which is like, can I shape myself in a disciplined way to get some stuff out there? And what would that look like? Because it's very mysterious, because it starts off in me as just this, I want to write on this, and then I don't quite know what's going to happen. It's very beautiful once I get into the flow of it, but then getting into the flow of it is that's 80% of the battle, right?
Yeah.
So I've been reading a lot of authors and what their kind of commandments that they would say to themselves were. Like Henry Miller, I think, had 11 commandments, and then this beautiful stuff by Hemingway, who would, like, this is how I contain my day, and I allow myself
they all had
to drink
discipline
in the afternoon, but never after dinner, you know, so the food could soak it up, and then I could go to sleep, and the dreams would fill up the well of creativity from which I may write the next morning.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you've, or you might be the anti.
Yeah,
I'm hearing the anti-disciplinarian.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
so how and when do words bleed out onto the scrivener, onto your laptop?
well, sporadically, of course, but I open it up and I look at it, and I really like what I've written so far. I really like it, and I've massaged it quite a bit just to get the tone. And if I can complete an entire book with the same tone, then I will like it. And that's the only, maybe other people go, I don't get it, or I don't, Yeah. But I can only write something that I would like to read, that I think, yeah, that sounds nice to my ear, or that's pleasing to me in some way. For some reason, I write a lot of aphorisms, like, necessity is the mother of invention is an aphorism. And I kind of write these kind of platitude type, I don't know why, as opposed to just a sentence with information. I want to make it be kind of pulled out. Hey, that's cool to me. Maybe other people won't get it. There's things from the Alabaster Girl, for instance, that I really love. Some sentences, I think, man, that is fantastic. And nobody ever mentions it or notices it, or I'm thinking really. And then I'll get it. And then somebody will put a quote up on Instagram or something like that, with Zan Perrion quote. And it's some sentence that to me was just kind of a throwaway, that I'm like, oh, okay, that's a filler. I'll throw that. You know what I mean? Something like that.
Yeah.
So you just don't know how it's going to land with people. But I really want it to be sculpted. I sculpt my words. That's my problem. That's why I'm not prolific. That's why I'm not writing out an essay and putting it out on Friday and then another one on Thursday, which contains great information, because the information to me is maybe it's not the most important thing. The sculpture is the most important thing. It has to sit there on the page, and to me, to my sensibilities, that's why I like these writers like Nabokov and stuff, because even though English was not his first language, he's Russian. His English, the way he would put English on the page, was Shakespearean. I couldn't remotely match it, and nobody can. Anybody talks about it. Oh, he's a writer's writer, and because he had a way of putting something down that had innuendo and depth in a sentence. The sentence had this other meaning, and the sentence had this flow, and to me, I've always liked that kind of beautiful writing, which I aspire to. And I look at my stuff, I think it's dross. But so for me, it's like I'm carving a sentence. That's what it feels like. I just don't put out a sentence. You asked me about how it bleeds into Scrivener, right? I put down a sentence, and I put another sentence, and I rearrange it, and I look at it, and it has to have even a certain length. Like here's a long sentence. Well, I can't have another long sentence. It's like there's a balance in there. So I'm looking at strangely enough, I'm looking at the symmetry and like if you say, beans, potatoes, and lemons, it can't be beans, potatoes, and lemons and apples, because there's no symmetry on it. It's too much of the sentence. Just, you know what I'm saying? And it can't be just beans and lemons, because it's not long enough. So the sentence has to have a carved kind of structure to it. And that's why it takes me so long to write.
Right.
Because I write a Facebook post and it's fast, or I'll write a newsletter and I'm done that in half an hour. Yeah. Which is a newsletter article. So weird. So
you're crafting and sculpting, and you're looking for a certain symmetry, but the thing that shows you that you've got it on point, that it's precise, and you've said the thing you wanted to say, is whether you feel pleased.
Yeah.
You'll massage it and there's a feeling of being pleased. Like, to me, that has.
Yeah, that, like I wrote the sentence, and it's kind of, I think it's a cool saying that I invented. I'm trying to find the right words for it, or the right structure. And the way I have it written right now is A life of wild abandon requires lots of preparation and discipline. So, you know, to have a crazy, unfiltered life, you have to plan it well and have a lot of discipline, which is kind of like a paradox. But I don't, and I think that's a cool saying, but I don't know how to put it in words yet. You know, I need to, so that because I think it's kind of cool, you know, like you can't have a life that's uncaring if you don't really plan it and have a lot of discipline for it.
Right. So there's a way that this sentence has to unfold to give like a maximum, like the cork comes out of the champagne bottle, you have that great swig, everything relaxes. That, you know, you made the sentence unfold for maximum satisfaction.
Exactly. And it's concise enough. Like there's a sentence in my book that I toiled over for about a week in The Alabaster Girl. And that is, well, when I mean toiled over it, I sat in my chair and I thought about it. Maybe I should change this word and adjust it. It had to be right. And that sentence ended up being, a man is happiest with a girl who reads books. And I rearranged that in all kinds of ways, but that sounded to me more like something that I would see, you know, by Marcus Aurelius or something, you know. I thought about it in different ways and how do you adjust it? And that landed right.
Yeah.
Or every great life has had in it a great renunciation. That was thought. I thought about that. How should that be best said? That's you know what I'm saying? And
well,
so
that one's particularly magical because how easy it is for other people to repeat it.
That's
so
the whole point.
How involved people are in our message, then they remember that sentence and they can repeat it to their friends in the bar on a Friday night and have the same satisfaction of.
Yeah, so I'll have an idea, Jordan, that is a cool idea of some kind of concept, okay? Like we talked yesterday when you and I did another call about the idea that rather than communication in the relationship, you should visit your girl. You know, to sit down and visit her with a glass of wine, whatever, and visit. And that to me is an idea that kind of stands alone. But now how do you write that in a paragraph? Or how do you write something so that it can be an aphorism or a sentence that makes sense and you get it immediately, you know? So I think about, that's my writing process. I think about that. How do I put that in a concise way that really hits the point? You know, early bird gets the worm type of thing.
Yeah. And what has to precede an aphorism like that? Just how much of a context or how much of a kind of journey do you have to construct so that the one sentence at the end of the paragraph leaves the
summarizes that paragraph? And that's what my writing is, a lot of that. I realize that. And just looking at it yesterday at a paragraph I was working on, there's sentence, summation sentence, like that puts it all and repeats it into this kind of. I'm just crazy, man, because I could write volumes, man. I can write volumes, but I get hung up on this trying to get. Well, I know James Joyce would agonize and change a word 40 times. That's not quite right. Not quite right. Not quite right. And I get that. Yeats too, you know, W.B. Yeats, the great Irish poet, would work on a poem that's like 8 lines long for years. T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland in the 20s, long epic poem of, you know, the state of the world. He never finished it. Worked on it. He only wrote I think Eliot only wrote like 10 poems or something like that, but he was one of the greatest poets we know. But he worked on that over and over and over. And there's all kinds of versions of it from him. And like I said yesterday in our call, Da Vinci never finished the Mona Lisa. He was famous for his procrastination, not getting out of bed. And all the works, by his own admission, he never finished anything, even the Mona Lisa. You know, and there was one point where he was hiding for 4 months because he had debt collectors and people, and no, he had people that were after him because he didn't finish the works that they paid him for. And he was hiding in a hole in this monastery in a room for 4 months to hide from everybody. That's the great Da Vinci. And as he said at the end of his life, his last words, supposedly by Giorgio Vasari, his contemporary biographer, basically said that his last words were, I have offended God and man because of the quality of my work. That's Da Vinci, one of the greatest well-rounded individuals in the entire history of the human race. So, yeah.
It's amazing. I'm sat with the thought of there is a particular breed or brand of artist who will obsess over the finest details of their work to the point of perhaps never even publishing it.
Yes, it's a very known thing.
And it's for the sake of beauty. It's for the sake of being absolutely precise in your self-expression.
Maybe, but it could also be self-doubt and think that that's not good. Like Picasso also said, right, you never finish the painting, you just walk away from it. But Picasso would whip something up like this, and he knew it wasn't finished, but it's done, and walk away from it. And then he had a volume of output. So he also knew that it was never complete and finished, no masterpiece, but he would say, I'm done with it. And he'd walk away. He had the guts and the balls to do that, where these other people, the meticulous ones, may not. And I lean toward that meticulous, where I'm trying to craft something.
Yeah. So we're totally in the weeds of the creative process. How do you know then, as a wordsmith, whether you are obsessing over a detail because you absolutely want to nail the beauty, you have to have full precision in the poem, or when it's a self-doubt moment and you're obsessing over the details is actually coming from some kind of mental noise, which is not
I don't think I have self-doubt. I don't think I have that, right? That I think is not good enough, because I never think that, wow, people are going to like this. I think that I like it, you know? So I don't have that feeling. If I wrote a book and put it out there and, well, I guess I shouldn't say that, and nobody liked it, then I'd be displeased. But if I liked it, then at least I would be able to say, I accomplished what I set out to do, what I felt in my heart. There was my vision put down. So I would have some kind of relief or satisfaction or fulfillment from that. I would have fulfillment from it, even if nobody liked it, to be honest. So I don't have self-doubt. Mine tends towards this pickiness, this meticulous, that could be well said. That could be said a little bit better. And that word isn't quite right. And I sit there and I'll stare at a word. As I'm writing with Scrivener, and I know words, I have probably one thing I'm good at is words. I've never spelled a word wrong in my life. Maybe just by accidentally typing fast. But if I can glance at a page in that I've never read, and I can see a typo, it pops out at me. It just like hits me in the eye. I can see it. It jumps right out of me. And so I'm good with words, and I have a large vocabulary, larger than a lot of people, I think. And yet when I'm writing with Scrivener, I have one Google Chrome tab open, and that's thesaurus.com. So I'm looking at the thesaurus because I'm thinking that's the word is that word, the word ribald works here, but it's not, doesn't has a nice rhythm to it, or what's something else. And so I'm always messing around with words. My palette is thesaurus.com. That's what and not because I'm looking for big words or obscure words, because I don't want obscure words, but because I'm thinking, okay, here's the word straightforward. Is there another word that means straightforward that would fit into this, that would feel a little different? So I just look it up on thesaurus.com, and there's like 8 different synonyms, and maybe it's not. And I think, okay, well, straightforward it is, but I mess around with it. I spend a lot of my time just messing with words. It's my palette. I'm painting with words, and like a painter, if the color's not quite right, he mixes it a little bit more, and then he tries it, and it's not quite right, and he scrapes it off, does it again. It's what Joyce did. Not that I'm comparing myself to these guys, but it's why I don't volume. It's why that I've only got 2 or 3 books in me, I think. Maybe 4, you know?
Very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting what we're talking about, because I haven't really talked about it.
I think I'm on totally the other end of the spectrum, where I'm much more like, I like to get into a flow and then it's total stream of consciousness. Something opens and then the floodgates are open and then the whole story just keeps barfing out. And it's like the best moments are moments where I'm writing, and then something shifts and I'm in some kind of flow. And as that gets deeper and deeper and deeper, it gets to a point of depth. And then it's like a sentence comes out and I'm like,
where'd that come from? Exactly.
Where the hell did that come from? Like, what is that? Like, and I know that it's a good day if I'm saying to myself, I'm crazy.
Good. Yeah.
Kind of the same as you, actually, with your meticulous humming over words. But I think if there's a point where it's like my own sense of sanity is up for grabs, or I'm doubting that, it feels like that's a creatively good spot.
But your story, Jordan, is mirrored by all writers, great writers. They say, I think it was, you remember who said it? He said, the writing is easy. You just sit at the typewriter and bleed. So in other words, you just sit there and stare at it. Inspiration doesn't come from, oh, I got this idea and go write it down. All the great writers knew they had to put in their work and they had to sit there for 4 hours a day. And in the process of that, something magical will come out of their fingertips and that surprises them, just like you. That's very common. These from Virginia Woolf to whatever. And, you know, our old friend, Henry Miller, you recommended an audiobook by Henry Miller and I listened to it. And his writing process was he would write just a bunch of words and then a beautifully crafted paragraph and then a bunch of words. And then, you know, he kind of went fits and starts and gallops and then this really quotable paragraph. And then he just write a bunch of more words. And, but your process is much, much more common. And sung about from all these writers. They say, you know, I just sit there and I write and write and write, and then something, poof, the magic comes out of the process of sitting there. And like you said, it goes deeper. By deeper, it means, Jordan, that you're escaping the land of consciousness. That's what I think, into the Jungian world of, you know, the subconscious, and that's where it comes from. Maybe a collective unconscious. You know, the enchanted world. This is where it comes from. None of these poets, none of these know where their ideas come from. They say, I don't know. It came from outside of me, channeled through me. Even Homer said this, you know, speak to me, O muse, because I got nothing. I'm nothing. And really, honestly, I am absolutely convinced that any kind of art that is sincerely endeavored and stuck with and put in the time and your head's down, you channel something from outside of you. It has to be.
Yeah. So I think at some point, maybe tonight after this podcast or tomorrow, I need to make a trip into the underworld to help me with a stuck point. And this is super exciting. So you were just talking about Henry Miller and the surrealists of the 20s. When Freud came along and talked about the unconscious, then art took this turn where it's like, what are techniques that we can use to access this never-ending stream of sensations and symbols, which have a way of connecting to a reader, which is subterranean. It's beneath what they're actually conscious of, but it can be just as powerful. So they imbibe messages through these different kinds of metaphors and symbols and analogies. So they had a whole bunch of techniques, right? Stream of consciousness and the kind of automatic writing.
And they tried all kinds of stuff.
So I'm writing a piece at the moment that's just exploded in content and scope and ambition and aspiration. Well, wanted to be like a newsletter is like this 10,000 word monster, and the span is like overwhelming. And I'll share a bit more about what it's about. I don't want to go too much into it, but I tell you what I've been doing since I got back from New Year. I've been working 3 hours a day. So I get up in the morning, have my coffee, hit Scrivener, and just see what comes out, right? And if I don't finish an article, I just leave it when the time is up, and then I go back to it the next day. And you just got to trust that the words will come back, even if I'm on a good streak, right? So I wrote one thing, and that was relatively easy. I wrote another thing, and that was relatively easy. And now I'm writing a third thing, and I was really meditating on the theme of living like champions.
Okay.
Right? So something that you teach as part of our Essentials program, the fact that every man on the earth can stand with his hand on his heart and say, I am from a bloodline of champions. My father, my father's father, my father's father's father. Right. I am descended from this great bloodline of warriors. And if I wasn't, I wouldn't be here today.
Right.
So it's the great motivational speech that you give, right? So I don't connect with that for shit for 1 second. And I think that there's a lot of men out there as well. They come into our program and they're like, well, I love the whole thing, but the bloodline of champions, like, what's that? If I look up to my lineage, it's like we came tumbling, scrambling out, super traumatized. We were living, you know,
divorced ancestors that were weak ditch diggers and
yeah, my family is basically all 4'10", never went on a battlefield in its life, you know, hid out in the Shire. And
well, at least they banged somebody. You have to admit that. Modern generation is not.
Right. And having, you know, 14 children in a family was a normal thing. So I'm looking at the my actual heritage and what is in my line, in my family tree.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, because I grew up and there was pain and sadness in the family home. And then I decided as a young boy, I'm not going to turn around and deal with that. I'm going to look to the future and create my own life. So that's great because you don't become a victim, you become self-empowered. But if you only look to the future, I think you become self-empowered while leaving this kind of ocean of hurt in the back. And I think at one point or another, that bleeds into the present moment, that bleeds into the future that you create for yourself if you don't look at what's back. And of course, I didn't want to be like my forefathers, but I ended up copying all of their life patterns anyway, right? Till I turned around at it and looked at who they were and looked at the ways they were living and so on, and learned that I could get out of the fate. I could actually change my fate by looking at the past. Yeah. So I wanted to know, I got curious, like really, what was my dad like and his dad and his dad beyond him and so on, and how far up that line can I go? And so it's difficult work because it means looking at the fears that I had as a child, as a young person. But I went to my mum, and while I was traveling around the world for about 15 years, my mum was driving around from kind of crumbling bat-infested church to bat-infested, you know, broken down old English parish hall in the countryside somewhere, looking for birth and death certificates of the family. Before the whole electronic DNA
she was doing the genealogy
thing. Yeah,
wow,
exactly.
That's so cool.
And she would come home and tell me the story about so and so. I never want to listen, so the ears would just close, and I'd go into my zone, right, as a younger person. And I phoned her up and I said, Mum, how did you do with that family tree? I think I'm finally ready to hear about what you did. Wow. She's like, wow, I went back as far as I could, but I got stuck. If you want, I'll send you the document. And I looked through the document, and this was one of the most fascinating days I've spent in recent memory. I got this PDF, it's about 40 pages, and it's just the bare bones of the records that we've got of all the different people on the family tree, right? So it's literally name, birth, death, location of birth and death, marriage, and if they had any children, and if so, how many, right? So it's blunt facts. And in my family line, I've only got actual recorded stories of 3 individuals.
So other than that is facts. And how far back does it go?
1655.
Oh man, I'm jealous of that. That's so cool.
I was like, what? And as this PDF goes on, the information gets more scant, right? So there's parts of the tree that I can't fill in, but there's some that keeps going back. And the woman's name would be Sarah A. or Anne M. Right?
So
no
cool.
birthday, just a vague name.
Maybe Anne Boleyn.
And it goes back to the top. Right. And it goes back, the earliest born member in my family line is 1655 that we're able to track down at the moment. So
wow, that blows my mind.
Super cool.
I love that kind of stuff.
Right. Yes, I know. The whole theme of history, right?
Yeah, my place in history is why I do anything I do. I want to know. And I don't have a genealogy because I'm from the Eastern European bloc, my father, and they didn't, the communists didn't keep records and destroyed churches and all kinds of stuff. So it's not very easy to go back.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
My girlfriend says the same thing.
Yeah.
Her and her friends came around and I'm going to show something actually, because why not? It's here. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get this. For podcasters, you won't see it, but I can't fit it in the screen and keep talking.
Oh, wow. So it's a family tree. Did you do that, or?
So I don't know how much of this you can see.
Well, we can see that it's definitely a forking tree, like a tree of genealogy.
Come a little closer.
Did you write that all out?
Yeah. So I went through the PDF document of the raw data and mapped out this tree.
Oh, wow.
And this took me 3 or 4 hours.
Of course.
And
incredible.
it was a beautiful task, because I would look at the name and write down the name, and then look at the place of birth and the date of birth. And then, because writing things out by hand takes a little bit of time, I'd have to feel every step of the way, right? And there's this really mysterious way in which some of the names that I would write down, I was like, wow, this person feels like they carry a charge. Like, what a name. I can feel like this person is a powerhouse or a force of nature, or this one was a bit meek and they don't seem to have much energy in it. Bit of a mystical thing, you know, whether you can buy into that or not. But it helped me get a feel for the family line. And the story's so interesting because they were all for a few generations in London, and it was total Dickensian London that they were a part of. Oliver Twist and
no kidding,
factories of the Victorian era, and there's some difficult.
You have some
stories.
chimney sweeps in your background when they're 8 years old crawling down the chimney.
I wouldn't want to know, actually, and it's pretty terrifying to think what some of their lives were like. And then I'm reading books about it as well, right? So there's this incredible The People of the Abyss by Jack London. Like, if anyone watching has got relatives in London and just what life was like.
How brutish,
He paints it. It's such, like, imagine the worst sweatshops and of the countries that are just industrializing right now, and the poverty and the slavery, basically, that people are going through to produce often the goods that we're wearing. It was like that, and 10 times worse in London.
And the filth of the city.
With no running water, with sewages, and people would throw their excrement out of a 3rd-story window onto the roofs of the people that lived below.
Yeah.
And because there was such an influx of people into London, they would build cowsheds and pigsties basically in the gardens, basically constructing over any bit of greenery left in the city. And a family of 10 would move into one tiny little room within that.
Yeah. Terrible, man.
Which is shocking. And I'm trying to figure out, you know, I think a lot of my family escaped just the worst of it, but some fell into that abyss. We know that because we've got the death certificates of where they died. And it's,
of course,
they down into.
Wow, that's so interesting.
The bottom of hell. Yeah.
It's so interesting you had your face turned away from it. And now, after these decades of sojourning and traveling and being this, you know, really unattached nomad, you turn around and take a look at it, and you turned your face from it. Something I'm writing about is this entire concept of home, you know, quotes around the word home. Odysseus and the Odyssey, that's one of the original narratives of Western Canada, the Western canon. And it's his quest for home, to go back to his home. And it's so interesting because the concept of home, which I think it was Hume talked about, and Kant, and the idea that all stories are a journey to try and come back to equilibrium or home, and all musical notes, they go up and down and up and down, but they have to land on equilibrium, which is the home note, to have resolution. And we all have this desire for home. And I have a strong pull for that idea of home that you're talking about. And yet I left Canada. And it's strange because I write about these things. I think about it all the time, home and the journey from order to chaos, and the hero's journey and Sir Galahad and all this kind of stuff. And yet I don't know where I would want to be buried. There's no place that really aligns with my sensibilities. Said, yeah, you know, bury me under the old tree in a wooden box. There's no place, because I was so as a child, we were kind of nomadic, and I have some very vivid and clear and beautiful memories from my early childhood in Canada. But it doesn't feel like home. Like I don't have this is why I've been fascinated by history and genealogy and all this kind of things, is because I'm trying to find a sense of home. I get that. That's interesting to me. I love the concept of it. I read about it all the time. If the philosophical idea of that, I think it was Hume that really brought that to the forefront. That all of our endeavors is to get a sense of home and a sense of belonging and a sense of resolution, so that we can be, you know, we can end our days and be. And I don't have it, man. I'm in Romania, but is it home? Canada, you know, and I love Canada, but I don't have this real pull toward it, like Odysseus. Isn't that interesting? So it's the same as you. We're these nomadic type of spirits that are writing about and trying to capture the idea of belonging and a homeland and duty and responsibility and family. You know, it's interesting. I don't understand
what's your current conception of what home is? How do you relate to the concept of home?
Yeah, the concept of home for me, because, you know, since I was a kid, I dreamed about having a home that is wall to wall books, you know, like the den, you know, and like a place that you go and sit in your comfy chair, and there's got this certain feel. And I still am pulled to that. I think that is still, but I think it's more like, you know, the old poem, a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and thou. You know, those three things is good enough to make my home. I don't know. And I think this is part of my quest for these years. I'm not kidding, is that I want to, like, envision your future, Jordan, when you're 90 years old, or say 70 years old or 80 years old. Where do you see yourself? Arrayed in white linen and, you know, sitting on a deck at a balcony, looking over the Sea of Greece or something? Or do you see yourself in a vineyard, or do you see yourself in traveling? I don't know what it is. I haven't come to that yet. I spend a lot of my time with my girl, and we sit and talk and contemplate, and we have a very quiet, joyful, fun-filled life, but there's not a lot of, you know, activity and fanfare and stuff. And that's the closest thing I have to home. And maybe that's all I have for the next 50 years. But when I say that's all I have, I can't think of anything I'd rather do. So if somebody gave me $1 million today, I can't think of anything I would change. I wouldn't buy a different coat or drink different coffee. I can't think of a single thing I would change, except maybe I'd fly first class if it, you know, just for the getting on the board, the plane faster. But I don't know. I feel and maybe that's part of my procrastination too, is that I feel really content. Content, I mean, I'm happy with my simple life with my girl and the simple things we do. And I can't imagine it being more grand than that. Give me a Lamborghini and give me this, you know, I don't have that drive. So I don't know what the concept of home is. I don't think I've come to that yet. I don't think I've arrived at that knowledge of what that feels or looks like. But it's with books surrounding me, and yet all my books are on my Kindle now. I've got 250 books on my Kindle, and now a bunch of audiobooks too. So this idea of this impressive library, right? It's like
that's just comfort or vanity, right?
Yeah.
Not even needed.
It's kind of gone away from it. Really, then it's just a look and feel. That it's just to have the feeling that you're sitting surrounded by this great volume of knowledge, but you know, you have it in your phone now. And I don't know, but for sure, when I think of home, I think of belonging, and I think of, yeah, that's strange, Jordan. I don't know where I would want to be buried if somebody asked me today. I don't know. Maybe scatter my ashes over the Wolverine River where I grew up fishing, you know? But that's the closest thing I could come up with. And I think it's because when you're a traveler like this, part of your fabric of you, your culture of you, is an amalgamation quilted. It's a quilt of all the places you've experienced. You lived in Brazil for 3 years. So part of who Jordan is, part of your entire way of thinking and sensibilities and your culture and your and the color of you is Brazilian. And so when you have this piecemeal scattered sensibility of life, it's difficult to come to say, well, I want to go back to that, because there's attractive qualities to everything that you've experienced. I don't know.
Yeah. And our forefathers also had that piecemeal kind of existence. So to think, for example, is there a home that endures? I've got this amazing map back to the year 1655, but there's no one place I can go back to in that map, because most of it got destroyed and replaced with a whole new city, right? Bombings in the war and the Reconstruction and so on. And then it's not the same. So even if there is a sense of home, there's equally a sense of anguish that if I was to go home to the town I was born in, it's so completely different in terms of vibe, look, feel, makeup, who lives there. Like, so there, I could go back to the home place, but the sense of yearning or nostalgia is overbearing, because the whole thing has changed and I cannot go back in time. The same. You can go back in place, but not in time. That's a very difficult thing to come to terms with, or to think about the Britain that I grew up in really doesn't exist, because so much happened in these 30 years. So there's a real grief, anguish to face about home lost. It's like, it's not in every story that the hero comes back to the hometown where he started and it got bombed. Right? And all his old mentors and loved ones and the family's not there anymore. They got, you know, the bad guy came and got them all, basically. There's kind of the one sign of opulence, like the one child who had a hope is now in some kind of orphan institute, that kind of thing.
I know this is on my mind a lot, and has been for many, many, many years. I think about this a lot. There's a great movie from the 80s, I think, called The Trip to Bountiful. And nobody's really heard of it, but it's got Dan Aykroyd in it. And it's his mother who just wanted to go back to her farm home. And him and his wife are, no, Mom, you're old. And she embarked on a trip by herself. And watch that movie, because I think about that a lot, that movie and that kind of thing, that you go back and it's gone. And so then it makes you wonder about the greater question, which is the same question, which is our place in the universe at this place and time of history. Why am I now rather than, in plague-ridden London? And who knows, because we have the opportunity to be more nomadic now I guess that's not true. I just read something where they found this Paleolithic man that they managed to extract DNA from, and they tracked his DNA, and he's like 10,000 years ago. And his ancestor, his direct ancestor, is a baker living 40 miles down the road in England. Direct, his DNA is like,
my God.
Yeah, look it up. Yeah, his ancestor from thousands of years is just still right down the same vicinity. Yeah. Direct DNA. That's incredible. Which is the opposite of you.
Yeah.
It's just some dude.
But I very much suspect I might end up in my hometown or something like that at the end of it all. I think one thing is, if you look back through the family, the number of motifs, and by chance, the people who go back to places where they came from before is shocking. The way that puffins, monogamous puffins, they spend 6 months a year in Antarctica and then they split up, and they say they're going to meet on a particular rock by the Galapagos in
Oh,
6 months'
wow.
time when the weather comes back. And from that rock, they're going to fly back to the Antarctic and pass the summer. And they remember exactly where to go, right? So it's how
Yeah.
does, or there's stuff with the salmon, like the salmon up in
Yeah.
your neck of the woods, actually, they know exactly which river to go up to then
Upstream.
lay
Yeah.
their eggs because, and that's like 10 generations of salmon before they would have been
Yeah.
born in that location. So it's not like they went there and then they remembered what streams to go up. We're talking 10 generations down the line. They go back there later on. And in my tree, there's something really phenomenal, which was basically a lot of the people that moved to London had to go because of recession at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, industrialization in the fields, taking jobs away, and a few bad droughts.
Oh,
And that
wow.
did
Okay.
for a lot of kind of local Shire people, I guess like the Hobbit people of England, right? They all had to climb out of the Shire and go into the city. So they spent actually 3 or 4 generations in London. And then at the end of it all, my granddad and now my mum, they got by chance an opportunity to leave London and go back to the countryside where another member of the family had migrated. And only when we saw the records kind of very recently, 10 or 15 years ago, did we discover that they moved back exactly to the same town from whence the very same family line came. Like 180
Wow.
years before. They left this patch of country in the
Wow.
Cambridgeshire Fens, went down to London, went through this entire crazy experience. And then by chance, they ended up moving to a town which is within miles of where the ancestors came. None of the
That's
family
so
knew
interesting.
that,
Yeah.
because they didn't pass down family stories from one generation to the next.
Yeah. I mean, like,
No one said,
that's so
yeah.
cool. I had, since I was a very small boy, I've had this feeling of not belonging. By that, I mean, I grew up in northern British Columbia, Canada, where the oldest buildings, a town is maybe 60, 50, 70 years old, maybe even 30 years old. And there was no mark of civilization. I found an arrowhead one time, but it's so few and far between. And people say, oh, the mountains are so old and nature's so wonderful. Yeah, I grew up in nature and I grew up in the mountains, but I had no sense of my belonging in civilization to the human race. And my father and mother split up when I was 4 years old. So I had no concept of a father. My father was, I never knew him for years. And so I had this real yearning for my place in history since I was young and that whole thing. And as I was working in the corporate world, if I would travel to, say, Chicago or something after a business meeting, I would always go into the antique bookstores. And I had amassed, a box full of books from the 1300s. I mean, from the 1500s. I had I still have it, Homer's Iliad from 1628 or something like that. All the signatures in it I've still got old books like that. And, wow. and or I would hold a Roman coin in my hand and I would look at this, and they sell for $10 a dozen. They're everywhere in London or England. Right. And I would hold this Roman coin and I would think, that started as somebody minted that, and it went to a soldier's pay who bought a prostitute, who bought a loaf of bread, who did something, and somehow it got down into my hands here in Canada, and it would blow my mind. And I reflect on that a lot. And so I was really trying to accumulate this knowledge of my sense in history. And now that I live in Europe, and right outside my apartment here, I can walk in 30 seconds. There's Roman ruins that are underneath the street. You can look down and see these Roman ruins. Now that I live in it, like you grew up in it, I have no compunction. I have no desire to walk into an antique bookstore and pick up an antique at all. It's weird because I think I've sated that desire for. I had to move into Europe to feel, because I had such a longing for that. And I don't know what that is born and bred of, and I don't know how that relates to the concept of my home is Canada. This is what fuels my quest.
Yeah. So you said your ancestors are from Eastern Europe. I wonder if you're doing somehow your best kind of salmon
Well,
salmon in
I'll
the
tell you. I'll
sea,
tell you what it is.
deep cellular memory attempt. Yeah.
I'll tell you exactly what it is. My father's Ukrainian. My grandparents came to Canada when they were 2 and 3 years old on the same ship, didn't know each other. And they went to Canada in, I can't remember, early 1900 something. And they met in a field when they were 17, and they got married and created this Canadian wing of us. So I knew my father was Ukrainian. My grandmother used to say they're from Snetten, Austria, because back then the Austrian-Hungarian border, you know, and Ukraine, it was overlaid, and that was part of Austria back then. Right. And I did the 23andMe DNA test, and it keeps getting more and more accurate as they update their records of that. And if I look at it now, my father's DNA is 100% from just north of Transylvania in Romania, the Carpathian Mountains, which is on the border of Ukraine, and right across the border from Romania, Snetten, this Ukrainian town that was part of Austria at the time that my grandmother said she was from, this tiny village, Snetten. And my father is from this entire DNA. And I traveled all over the world, from, you know, Colombia, South Africa, Panama. Yeah, it's a great. I'm going to stay here forever. You know, Brazil. And there was only when I came to Romania that I stopped traveling. And I don't know why. I didn't know why, but it just, everything about it made me feel like I like the weather. I like the food. I like the women. I like everything about it just felt really, and is very much aligned with the place I grew up in Canada. There's the same weather system, same temperatures, same kind of feel. So I really, really liked Romania. And now I realize my father, and on 23andMe, it says, here's the 10 places that the DNA is strongest. And one is up, you know, the Carpathian Mountains, just above Transylvania. Then there's Iași, which is by Moldova on the right. And then Bucharest city is the third one. So I have it, and that's the entire place that my father's line is from. Ukraine, Romania. So absolutely, I came back unknowing. I didn't know this before 23andMe. I didn't know it until years after I came to Romania. Had no clue.
Yeah, it makes me wonder about Deanna as well. And if the two of you have this intergenerational knowing that is cellular level memory of just recognition, like you're someone from the village over that.
And that's something.
I think that's how deep it can go.
And I would be content to stay here for the rest of my life. There's everything about this city and this country just really resonates with me. And, you know, for instance, I love Colombia. Great. You've been there, and you know the energy of it. It's and could I live there forever? Yeah, probably. But I would rather be here. And I kind of stopped traveling, as you know. Like I still travel to do speaking and stuff. Well, this coronavirus kind of stopped it. And I go to see my family in Canada once every 2-3 months. I fly to Canada. I did before this year. But that's gone out I stopped traveling. My desire for travel has waned. I still want to see St. Petersburg, which I've never been. And I still want to see Argentina, which I've never been.
Yeah.
And that's about it. Strange.
So this Homeric notion of home, you're near, but like it sounds like you're ever so near, but there's just a piece or two to click.
Well, I think, that's a good point. Now that you're bringing that up, and I'm realizing it as you're saying it, I kind of have this return to my DNA ancestral grounds, but I guess I never put the 2 and 2 together. I don't know. I don't know what it means. We're looking at an apartment right now, Deanna and I, and it has a real sense of historical feel to it, the books type of energy, you know. And maybe I just sit there. You know, my ambitious days, my ambition for my next 50 years is basically to sit and write. Even though I don't really write, even though I'm not, I sit there and mess around with the sentence over and over again. But to sit in a life of contemplation and look out the window and listen to you know, this apartment we're looking at, it's got an Orthodox church near it, and the nuns sing. There's 7 nuns there apparently, you know, and they sing. And to sit and hear that wafting up through the trees to your apartment sounds like a pretty good life. As writing and thinking and you know, entertaining. When you come to town, we have this social energy. What else is there? What other thing can I possibly imagine I'd rather do? Nothing. I can't.
Yeah.
Like, that's why this money thing couldn't possibly give me any more sense of fulfillment than I have now. Because, but and I said the word content earlier, but that's not contentment, because I'm driven. I'm internally, I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm thinking about a concept I'm trying to understand, or I'm thinking about the things we've talked about in this podcast for the last year. I constantly think about this and I want to know. And I know I'll never come to a knowledge. I'm not going to be any more knowledgeable than any physicist or poet but to live a life thinking on these things, to me, is the greatest life ever. That's all I want. In my rocking chair, I'd be happy. Sit there for the next 40 years. Here we go.
Sounds like you're closing in on it, that sense of home. That's my
yeah,
take.
Interesting. I never thought like that before, but that might be what it is. Yeah. In other words, it's a home that's created, as opposed to something I return to the ancestral grounds, but on top of that, you build something that is, I'm 120 years removed away from the ancestral grounds. Right. But you come back like your parents did, or right? They went back to the ancestral grounds and they built something on top, unknowing.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like, I think maybe this is a common thing for anyone that's ever gone into exile. I guess your grandparents would have gone into deep exile to go to the far side of Canada. You've kind of sniffed your way slowly back, unawares, probably most of it, but both through the location that you choose and even the flat, like which apartment that you get for yourselves is going to feel right, and why. The one with the Orthodox Church. Why? Because the resonance and the frequency, and the nuns are going to sing out of that. And like the elements, I think you will choose elements that conspire to make that original diorama, right? The shape and the geology of where it was that you came within the kind of perimeter. And you might, like, should you ever find the birth certificate of, I don't know who in your line, you'll laugh and be like, that's in the next village. It's 3 miles down the road, or something like that. Or, you know, some great-great-grandfather came over here one day for the fete and he loved it. You know, that's where he met so-and-so, and they went off, and like something of that.
Drawn to those footprints.
Yeah. And also in your work as well, it's like the writing is meticulously honing in bit by bit on like that element of home, or that element of aesthetic completion that I think
wow, that's well said.
Odysseus is pointing to.
That's well said. Yeah. And it's subconscious. It's a subconscious pull. That's so interesting. And you never hear anybody talk about this, you know? I was just seeing this, reading about Jamal Khashoggi, the guy that was killed in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul. And, and he was exiled to the United States because he was in danger in Saudi Arabia. And he worked in the Washington Post and stuff like that. And his secret recordings, or his private recordings, were all about him missing home. Saudi Arabia. He wanted to go back someday to Saudi Arabia. And Casanova was from Venice, and he was in danger for 20 years if he went, back to Venice, that he was going to be arrested because he escaped from the jail there and took off around his escapades. But they pardoned him and invited him back to Venice. He was so happy to go back to Venice, a place he didn't know since he was 13 or 14. Well, he got in jail there, so. But you know what I'm saying? Is like he was so delighted to go back home to Venice. He's a Venetian, and Khashoggi wanted to go back to Saudi Arabia. That's where his heart was, even though it was like dangerous for him. So I'm impressed by those real strong. It impresses me because I don't have it. If I never set foot in Canada again, I would think, okay, except my family. If my family wasn't in Canada, I probably wouldn't go back for any reason. I don't have that. To the north of Canada, the wilderness, yeah, I would go back and sit in a cabin, you know, by the lake. Maybe that's where I'm going to, is like to my senior years will be sitting in a cabin, you know, in a rocking chair on the deck, looking at the lake and the trout jumping, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking of your poem, the three things that a man has ever searched for. And I think they're all three different faces of home. So you've got your,
man is only, the poem is, man is only ever searched for three things in this world: the source of light, the perfect note, and alabaster girl.
So the source of light is your mystical awakening.
Yeah.
And what you hope to find through the meditation or the ayahuasca or the different things that you're striving out in the world to go and discover.
Yeah, and where did we come from?
Consciousness.
What's the source of it?
So there's a sense of home in that I'm not suffering if I am in some kind of awakened awareness, which is a refuge, but it's not going to last every single minute of your life.
Yeah.
Under all circumstances, right? Exactly. And then you've got the home, which is the alabaster girl, which we talked about in the other video, which is to allow the devotion of your woman in. And the way that so many of us men on this journey are looking, it starts out with wanting a woman in our life, or it starts out with wanting many women in our lives, but it's really about, can I allow the devotion of a woman to come in? Because those moments when the man is happiest with a girl who reads, she's in the corner, you're in the corner doing your thing. It's like quiet. I don't have to be or do anything. Any sense of performance or trying to make a good relationship happen is gone. She's reading, she's content. I'm playing with my words, I'm content. She's making a soup while I work.
Or she's painting.
Ultimate. Yeah, the devotion just fills up the space. So there's a sense of home. It doesn't matter where you are, as long
That's
as you're
correct.
with your baby, right?
That nails it. That's 100% my home is my time with my girl. I can think of nothing else on earth I'd rather do. Nothing. And the separateness is fantastic, as opposed to clinging on each other. She's doing her craft. I'm over here doing, you know, contemplating, looking out the window, scratching my head, wondering what home means. And it is home. There's nothing better in this world.
Where could it be?
I'm looking at the horizon.
Baby, I made you dinner. Yeah, it's going to be chicken tonight and potatoes. It's an old recipe from my grandma. Where?
This to me is a fascinating conversation, Jordan. Fascinating. And this is on the edge of my understanding.
Right. And I'm seeing that the third piece of this, the perfect note, what's the ideal way that we should live our lives, is like, what is the ultimate kind of conjunction of elements? What's
the resonant note?
Myself. Yeah. What are the sounds and the sights and the smells that surround me in my neighborhood where I choose to live? What is the right house for me to own? Which mountains should it be facing upon, or which sea? Right. And then what is the flow of my days from waking in the morning until sleeping at night, like that?
Yeah.
That's kind of the home of the animal body, right? Where this deep genetic thing, which is beyond our choice or consciousness, most of the time, where can that actually let go and rest?
Yeah, like even, you know, Albert Camus and his idea of absurdism, or the concept of that there is no, that life is just we're born and there is no meaning to it. So, but his conclusion was, because there's no meaning to it, create a meaning that makes you have lighter steps in the day. Like create a path through life that's enjoyable, and create your own meaning. And it's the same thing. It's the perfect note. What is the perfect note idea is that from cradle to grave, the source of light is, you know, why are we here? That what is that the beginning of why it began, which is a huge, you know, why is there something instead of nothing, was that is the biggest philosophical question of all time, right? And all science and all philosophy is trying to figure out the Big Bang or whatever. And then now that we do acknowledge that we have been born, we are on this earth, we are a human species. What's the perfect note? How can we live with justice and ethics and civilization and society? You know, what is the perfect note of and art until we die? And so it doesn't matter religion, doesn't matter a staunch scientist or a staunch theologist. you all have this desire for that perfect note of a life. You want to look back and say, at least I did that. And at least I had that. At least I tried that. And so I think these are the common things that you're right, to construct the concept of home. This is fascinating to me. This is fascinating. This is the kind of conversation that I'm seeking, if that makes sense. You know?
Well, funnily enough, we're sparring these ideas back and forth. I'm on the other side of the coin when it comes to home. Like, one thing that this whole thing gave me.
That's so cool.
Amazing tree. And look at that again later on. Is the sense of, if I ever spoke with anyone remotely psychological, they'll be like, why are you traveling the world? Like, what are you running away from? There's stuff unaddressed in your mother's and your father's relationship, and you need to go inside and feel that pain, right? As the therapist of the world would say. And sometimes I would buy into that line of questioning and really look at where and how am I broken, because to do all this traveling, or to be so footloose, and cats banging against the the windows here. I'm so unattached or unrooted into an ongoing family ground that they'd be like, you need to repair that. You need to do the work to fix those wounds. And I look at this and I'm like, you're absolutely fucking stupid.
Yeah,
like,
wow.
Are you kidding?
Wow, yeah.
Look at, you see what this home is,
Yeah.
that all these different generations, if you can expand upon the parental thing and go up to 9 generations, why would I ever go back? These people toiled for shillings every single week, shillings, and didn't have enough bread to break to go around all the children that would live in a 1-bedroom house. So as soon as one generation comes along that can gather enough money to get the hell out of that horrific existence and see where his money is going to go a bit further, and buy himself a soft life for a while, you're like, I'm going to go to this place. It's good value. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to read the books I want to read. I'm going to get myself an education. I'm going to not work for this draconian, the English system of work. And that, the way they did things in the Victorian age was still in my upbringing at school. We had architecture from that era. We had dinner ladies and teachers that would speak to you as a machine. You know, the children should be seen and not heard. Shut up. Like, don't speak out of turn. Everyone get in a line from the tallest to the shortest type thing. Like, this whole kind of British military thing was evident in my own upbringing. So I think I think my forefathers would be dead proud that I got the hell out of my country, of me. I think they'll be, you know, we longed for this for
we're
centuries.
Living vicariously through you as ghosts.
Cheering me on from the heavens, right? Cheering me on from the heavens. Yeah, and it redeems. Here's the thing.
Yeah,
I wonder if anyone that's watching this is like, oh yeah, I've read, I'm into men's work, and they say you should look at your family, your personal past, and to go beyond that and look at, ponder a couple of 100 years of your family history. It absolutely redeems the things that happened on the familial scale. So
good, man.
Because you like, look at a bigger arc of the historical picture of your life, and just wonder, okay, I'm redeemed to a massive degree by doing this kind of work. And I think you asked as well before, like asking about home, right? I've got deep unanswered questions about home, because my girl, my beautiful alabaster girl with whom we share a home, and we looked at each other, and this is like a tender, vulnerable moment early on in our relationship. We looked at each other and we were like, you know what? You're my home.
Wow. Yeah.
And it landed, right? Those words were true. It was like, fuck, that's really true. And she was like, wow, you're my home. So wherever we go, we make this for each other, right? But we don't know where we're going to buy a house or get some land or get an apartment, or what country we'll choose. It's an impossible question at this stage in our lives to answer. But to know this about my family fills me up, because even though, if you read the social history, you think, God, like, what must these people have lived through? And it's like that most places in the world, unless you're from a line of, you know, aristocratic or secure middle class stock or whatever it may be. Like most of us came from the sewers and the
it's like the reincarnation people. The reincarnation people that always, they were an Egyptian princess or a Roman gladiator. They were never, they weren't a boot black.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, in my past life, I realized I was an Arabian knight. Yeah. They always had a glorious past. Wait a minute.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what happens? Like when I tell the story of what I feel about the family to anybody else, like what comes through me is laughter and joy, as if it's the very laughter and good humor that the English had to get through these terrible situations, and the way that these people would know how to make the most out of a good Friday night, right? Or a good celebration, or a king's coronation. They'd take to the streets and be like, fuck, we're going to sing our songs, and there's a piano in the local pub and we all know the words, and we're going to stand around drinking and singing in unison, right? And they have their poetry and their plays on words and so on. And the good humoredness and that the sense of against all odds and adversity we survived and here we are, that I take that as a heritage. And I think beyond the dark shadow, beyond the feelings of my family that I don't want to face or accept as mine, beyond that, there's gold. There's so much gold into the past. And the story is unfolding. You start to discover who some of the people were and their good traits. And I get to look up and be like, wow, there's incredible gifts that are coming down through me. So there's a sense of, a beautiful conversation I've been part of lately is exile and belonging. Right? So you've got your exile, which we've talked about, exile from home, but then there's belonging. Sometimes you can't get that back in the real material world because it's not there anymore. But through the imagination, you can choose to belong both to your own family, if only you can discover something about it. And also the belonging to the kind of lineage we're talking about. Like, I don't belong to great intellectual forebearers, but we can choose through the books that we've read or the characters from history, the Casanovas and so on, who are our champions,
right?
And who we want to put on the kind of our inner pantheon of mentors and guiding lights.
Yes.
And that's a choice. It's a play of imagination and faith and belief, but it's a choice. Oh yeah, I can align with the incredible heritage that these people before me have left. Because without that, we are the kind of lost, postmodern, I don't belong to anywhere. I reject my old country.
Yeah.
I reject my new country.
Tradition's gone.
Yeah, every piece of work now has to deconstruct the sense of home. So we land in more chaos and confusion at the end of the symphony than we land in a sense of harmony and integration and completion, right?
Exactly.
So even that kind of art that mirrors our lives, and the fact that like there's a sense of not belonging. And I'm reading about, I mean, they're difficult political situations, but people are protesting today on Australia Day because the very day of their constitution means the day of colonization of the people that were there before, right? So there's the older generation is proud and the younger generation is like,
no, we reject this. Yeah.
So there's where do then we belong when we deconstruct everything? It's the exile within that
exile,
I think deadly.
And you know, we've got things like the paradigm of this earth is things like Twitter, which are the furthest extension of deconstruction, deconstructionism, to break things down into the smallest sound bite. So it's just talk about postmodern, you know, and the postmodern irony of, well, I talk about that forever. But I think, you know, what hits here in your discursion you just outpoured is the concept of redemption. Like you said that with strength when you said that, you know, I feel this sense of redemption, and underpinning everything that we've been talking about in all this podcast and the Alabaster Girl is the concept of redemption, which is the concept of home and resolution. And I think because the world is, we have discarded today the idea of an enchanted world, and you know, tourism has replaced pilgrimage, for instance, and you know, concerts have replaced revivals. I think that we've turned away from that, what we call the transcendent realm. And I think because of that, we have this burning, yearning, earnest feel in our breast, with this longing for resolution, for redemption, for home, for salvation. And we've lost the concept of that. And our human need is to be drawn to that subconsciously in all kinds of ways. So I think that there's such an unrest in the world, as we've pulled away from the enchanted concept of the world. We become more rats in a cage, I think, and violent and aggressive and angry and suspicious and blaming. And like you said, the older generation is looking at the traditions that were handed down and the stories from the fathers, and they want to hand it down to the children. And the children are saying, no, we reject it because it's, privilege, or, any of this other kind of stuff. And
we don't want to hear it because we're hurt, or we don't want to hear it because there's pain or something in it. It's
loaded. Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the concept of conservatism with a small c, the whole idea is to conserve traditions and stories and literature and the buildings and architecture, to conserve it for your children and their children's children, et cetera, on down. And the deconstructionist concept, the postmodern concept, is these traditions are evil in themselves and need to be torn down. Institutions, the history of Western society needs to be destroyed. And so, I mean, this is a large conversation, but conservatism in the small c sense is to conserve what we've had, like, Beethoven's symphonies, to hand it down to another, so that they learn the ear to listen to that. They receive it, and it becomes part of their heritage that they hand down. And there's an entire movement today to say, no, that's bad, and to destroy it, to tear it down, to replace it with, well, no, not replace it, because the postmodern idea is not to replace something that the institutions and traditions you tear down, they have nothing that they're offering to replace it with. It's just tear it down, which is deconstructionism. And the whole thing of, so, which is our modern art, modern architecture. Everything is like, let's shock. And like art used to be, it went from mimesis to poesis, mimesis to poesis, which is basically, art used to be copying something in life to representing, it mimicked life. And now art is its own entity. It's not a mimic of something. It's not a copy of something. It stands alone. It became its own thing. It's never done that before, and it doesn't imitate anything. It just sits and it becomes its own thing. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but it's certainly changed. And I don't know. This is an interesting concept, this entire conversation. I'm rambling now, but
I think the thing that struck me most has been your yearning for home.
Yeah. And writing about it. I'm writing about it. I wrote about it in The Alabaster Girl. The idea, the last chapter of The Alabaster Girl is the way of salvation. And I don't mean salvation in a well, I don't know what I mean. I'm trying to capture it, and I'm trying to capture it in this next book. This next book, I think you could say is the last chapter of the book, The Way of Salvation, and trying to expand it into understand it, the concept of home, art, mimesis, all this stuff. So science, physics, which I'm fascinated in all these subjects. Not enough time for me to absorb it all.
So there's like, I think what I'm pondering kind of as we bring this thread to the end is there's this transcendental notion of home, which can be created anywhere. If you get in touch with that holy vibration, we can all feel home in a way in an instant. if the channels of perception, and if we're able to go into that space, right, get out of our thinking and find that gratitude, contentment, ease in the place that we're at. But there's this deep animal DNA encoded knowledge of where our home is, like beautifully portrayed in your route to the Transylvanian village. Right? It's almost like, how does the salmon know that it needs to go back here to lay its eggs,
exactly,
right? For the next generation. So there's something deeply animal about home that's in us,
instinctual,
that I don't think we can avoid asking about, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this whole synthesis that has to happen after this postmodern age of deconstruction, and the amount of footloose people, and it's going to go more and more crazy. It's just going to speed up. I think the thing I've loved about COVID is we have to lock down, so we have to stop traveling, and the globalization has to pause. It's put on pause. What a beautiful way to refresh the lungs. Yeah, when that comes off again, you're going to see offices, mobile workers.
Of course, it's not going to be the same.
Of the digital nomad that we've been under the cover living.
It's going to be everywhere.
Right? So you're going to be watched and observed by everyone, and paying taxes to the day in the countries that you go into, and you're going to have to get visas and so on. So there's going to be this mass scale globalization like never before. But the synthesis of we ought to find a place internally and in the world, and then we ought to, I think there's a moral maybe a duty, maybe that strikes me as a bit of a strong word, but there's a moral
responsibility.
There's something about leaving for the next of kin. Like, okay,
yeah,
here is a route.
Yeah, passing down. I mean, you know, you think about the opposite of conservatism could be the idea of, well, individualism for sure. But, you know, climate change is a huge thing. And why would someone who's an absurdist, for instance, or thinks that we're just chemicals, why would they care about the generations 500 years from now, or 1,000 years from now, or the earth 1,000 years from now? But they do care. They want, why are we concerned about climate? It's not because we think we're going to burn up in the next decade, but we're going to burn up in the next 100 years, you know, and it's bad for the planet. And so we should be stewards of the planet. So they do care. Everybody cares about the future generation. It's not their generation they're necessarily concerned about. Maybe it is. Maybe if they're, you know, maybe they think, you know, if they live in California, they run out of water. I get that. But everybody has this burden for the future of the human race, which is interesting when you think about it. Conservatives have it in like traditions handed down, and knowledge and high art passed on down, and lofty concepts passed down. And the opposite, I guess, would be liberals, which have this concept of climate change is destroying us. I don't know. Well, I'm getting political here, and I'm not political, so.
Before we closed, I had a question from a viewer who wanted to ask you about longevity.
Okay.
So because you mentioned on here as well that you plan on living another 50 years. So I think one part of the question is a double-barrel question. One part of the question is why, and I imagine that it's like you want to see how this turns out and all the things we're talking about, but you can understand on that a little bit more. And then the second part of the question is how. Like, what are some of your daily, weekly, monthly practices that you do
touch on that
to sustain?
Yeah, the why is interesting because I'm immensely curious about life and eras in the future, and I want to live as long as I can to see how things develop and how things unfold, and the ups and downs and the catastrophes and the great new booming technologies. I'm very much a futurist. I love technology, believe it or not, even though I'm this forest guy and I have a simple life. I like technology. I like the concepts of new things in science and physics. It just blows my mind. I love it all. And I really believe in technology. that's why I never worry about the world running out of food. Or I honestly, I don't worry about the climate either, because I think that we are going to resolve it. We have the resources, the mental resources, and the capacity to invent new ways of living, and et cetera. And so I'm not worried about that. I think technology is going to save us. I want to live long because I'm 57 now, man. Like, I'm getting some wrinkles, dude. I had my birthday in December.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, and then the how is I eat a ketogenic diet. I have for a decade mostly, and I eat one meal a day. I only eat once a day. I eat in a basically a 2-hour window at 7 o'clock at night. I take a nap every day, and I don't stress. Stress is I think is the number one thing. Like, I don't stress about my second book being finished. I have a strong feeling it will be finished, but if it didn't, if something happened and I couldn't finish that book, and I would come to terms with that. There's something in me that wouldn't stress about that in some way. I don't have this frustration feel. And it's because I've been frustrated a lot in my life, I think, and you go past that and you realize, this blip that we are in the universe, what does it matter? Like you said, you look at your generations there and you feel the sense of redemption, because what did that matter? All those, that N M and N S are just reduced to that as 4 letters, N M. Her entire life of, she could whistle and she could whittle and she had 6 kids and she made the best apple pie and she loved, the art of whatever. It matters nothing. It matters not one drop. And so that's us, and so I really think, my practice is longevity. I sleep when I'm tired. If I've done weekend intensives that you've been in part of, somewhere in the world, where you've gotten your guys from Friday to Sunday, and it's days and exercises, and I feel like it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm right in the middle of it. I'm like, man, I'm tired. Everybody out of the room. 15-minute break. Everybody out of the room, and I close the door, turn off the light, lay on the carpet in the conference room floor, and take a 10-minute shuddering type of falling asleep. Wake up, I'm perfectly refreshed. So I sleep whenever I'm tired. And I'm such a night owl. I don't go to sleep till like 3 a.m. But my practices are simple. Number one is don't stress. I don't stress. I really believe in relaxing in the arms of life, like Casanova expressed it. I really do. And something that's seemingly bad, that really, really hurtful or something, you look at it from a removed perspective. I've talked about this before. So, but my physical practices is I sleep whenever I'm tired. And I know a lot of people can't do that, but me, with this sedentary writing type of life, but I take naps. And if I worked in the corporate world, I would still take my lunch break to take a nap. And I eat once a day, and very, very simple vegetables and fish or something. I don't eat junk food or processed food. So I don't know.
So there's a few kind of specific, measurable, implementable things that you do, food stuffs that you don't eat.
Yeah.
The meal, like 1 meal a day. But it sounds like most of it is much more, there's the not stress, like there's a disposition.
I think that's the number one thing, Jordan, is that is the attitude towards life, and the calmness that and rejoicing you go through. I'm very much I rejoice a lot. I'm happy to see my girl. I'm in my studio right now, which is a 3-minute walk from my house. And I actually slept here because I did some late calls last night. So I slept here on the couch in the studio, which is a 0-bedroom apartment. And it's a 3-minute walk to my apartment where Deanna is right now. And every time I see her, my face lights up. I rejoice, and we jump and dance because I see her. And I just saw her 3 hours ago, for instance, right? Doesn't matter. there's a celebration underpinning everything, even though my book's not being done. So I don't know. I think that keeps you young. I really do. Yeah. So I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the practices, I guess. Yeah. So I have to live for the next 50 years, guys. I'll be sage with my white beard, sitting in some rocking chair over the Aegean Sea, looking out over, with the grapes growing and over my head. That's my vision, man.
What was the island that Homer was from? The name of his home? Sorry, Odysseus.
I can't remember.
What was his homeland?
I can't remember.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
Someone clever will pop up in the comments with the answer to this, and we'll be grateful.
I don't think. Yeah, I can't remember. But anyway.
All right. Well, let's leave it here.
Okay.
For today. Yeah. What a conversation.
Exactly.
For more like this, for stuff like this and more, to go deeper down the rabbit hole, sign up, newsletter, Amorata.com.
Sign up for our Essentials course, which we started, 3 times a year. We're starting the next one coming up soon in February.
Very soon.
Go to amorati.net. I'll put a link at the end of this video. amorati.net. Join this conversation. Join the brotherhood of guys like Jordan and me that want to have this conversation, never ceasing, and want to have a great celebrating life full of abundance with women and life and art and cradle to grave, man. Thanks, Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Zan. Thanks for joining us. We'll continue soon.
Bye, guys.